everyone. Good evening. I hope that you've had a fabulous Wednesday. I know mine has been extremely productive, and I just got an awesome Facebook request for another potential opportunity to meet all of you face to face for another speaking opportunity. So I'll let you know. I'll know if you've got some extra time and some extra bucks and you want to meet me in the Dominican Republic. I will be there at the end of September for the Latin Chiropractic Association's convention. So I'm super excited about that. And you'll also get to see Dr. Edwin Cordero, who, of course, as you know, is the president of Sherman College, and Dr. Michelle will be there. So come on down to the Dominican and join us if you've got some extra mileage in your account and extra time and want to have an awesome opportunity to hook up with lots of great chiropractors in I'm pretty sure that's south of the equator. My geography isn't super awesome, but at any rate, here's what I'd like you to do. When you join us, put in the comment section where you're joining us from. There's Dr. Patrina. Hi, great to see you. Where you're joining us from. And here's what I'd like to know tonight, because I've got Bob Thatcher here with me, who happens to be my first cousin, and he has so much experience on the other side of commercial real estate. So all of us who are negotiating leases and trying to make sure we're not getting ripped off and all of those kinds of things, we're going to help solve your challenges this evening. But to make it really personal, here's what I'd like you to do. Pop in the comment sections any questions that you have about your lease, or maybe you're thinking about moving your space and you have some questions and we want to answer them. So let me just tell you a little bit about my cousin, Bob. So he has over 30 years of commercial real estate success and experience. Principally, he's been involved on being like a whole mall and strip mall manager. So he's the guy that we would be negotiating with for our spaces. And now we get to know the playbook in order to make sure that we've got a fiduciary in our court. And I'll just let you know, like, he helped me negotiate my lease when I was in practice. And I distinctly remember that the leasing company made me promise that I wouldn't discuss my lease with any other tenant, because he was so aggressive and like definitely put me in the driver's seat of my lease. And I'm forever thankful, because I got to have a low rent and all of these extra perks that I didn't even know about. And that's why I've also asked him to be one of our boot camp coaches. So if you're in the boot camp, this is Robert Thatcher, who is handling all of our real estate, commercial real estate, and touching on investing for real estate. Hey, there's Johnny. He is one of our boot camp coaches now, one of our boot camp contributors. So Robert Thatcher, welcome to Facebook Live with me. It's great to have you.
Barb, this is so fun. I'm grateful for the invitation and the opportunity, and have really enjoyed, honestly, watching your coaching career blossom. And but I know the content is highly valuable, and everybody's getting fed here in important ways. And so that's certainly our hope and intent, and couldn't be more excited to join you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do like a little walk down memory lane. And what has been your experience in chiropractic, being the son of a phenomenal chiropractor, and the nephew and the brother and all of those? So let's go way back to when your dad got started in chiropractic.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a great story of in fact, maybe next time we do this, or during the course content, I'll provide the picture of myself as a 1-year-old boy on the adjusting table with my dad in 1960. And boy, I tell you, I am so thankful to have been raised very holistically, certainly within heavy influence from chiropractic, and as well as acupuncture as well. My father excelled for over 40 years in acupuncture and chiropractic. And of course, Dr. Bob's recently passed earlier this year, but we're still finding joy and celebrating his important and great story, and over 40,000 patients at Chiropractic Services Limited. So now, of course, in fact, frankly, I studied to be a chiropractor in college. I went through all my basic sciences and was prepared to go down to Logan Chiropractic, St. Louis. But boy, that bride of mine, Julianne, had gotten the best of me, and I stayed on at Western Michigan in Kalamazoo and dated her and married shortly after we left Western Michigan. With all that said, my two younger brothers, your first cousins, Dr. Bill Thatcher is practicing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Dr. Ted and Dr. Johnette Thatcher, his bride, are all the way out in California now practicing, and really still very focused on a body, mind, and soul approach to their practice particularly. And Billy's also added lasers quite recently to his Ann Arbor practice and just having tremendous results in that regard. So I feel akin and understand the philosophy. Frankly, I got innate right here in these hands and understand it completely, and am benefiting from a lifelong chiropractic patient, never been immunized, and I could go on and on. But it's fun to talk that through and to have that relationship with you as well, Barb, is an important part of our large family as well. So,
And Uncle John.
John Thatcher, yeah. And so my father, 3 uncles, and about 4 or 5 cousins are all chiropractors. So
yeah,
exactly right.
And Dr. Tom Postic, if you're watching, number one, thank you for the book. I got it yesterday. And Dr. Tom is like basically resurrecting and rehabbing the Gonstead Clinic.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they just had a huge celebration there in April. And the reason I bring that up is Uncle John Thatcher, who is Bob's cousin. My Uncle Bob, it's his brother. He was a big Gonstead practitioner, and is well known in the Gonstead community. So if you're a Gonstead person, hey, there's Kirsten. Hey, Kier. At any rate, and your dad was chiropractor for, was it one of the vice presidents or? And let's tell that a minute.
Yeah, it's a great story. As a young man, Hubert Humphrey was running for president in 1968, and my dad was his personal physician and chiropractor and traveled the country, the campaign trail really, for over 6 months. And after long, hard, grueling days at 2 or 3 in the morning, Humphrey would lay down on the bed in the hotel, and my father would treat him and keep him going. And there's a lot of stories actually about how they finally got some portable tables, and my dad had chiropractor printed on the black cases and made the Secret Service guys carry those across the tarmac in front of all the newsies and so on, promoting chiropractic. And,
awesome.
And one other thing I guess I can share briefly is his very huge lift over a 4-year period in Washington, D.C., actively really lobbying on behalf of chiropractic and the inclusion of chiropractic and Medicare under his stewardship, and many chiropractors across the country really participating legislatively. But that has provided quite literally billions of dollars over these 50 years or more. And above all, provides that important, good quality natural health care to so many Medicare patients as well.
Yeah, I remember your dad when I was in chiro school at Logan telling me the story of, I think there were a couple of suitcases of money that were going around, and that's how you get things done in Washington, D.C. And chiropractic was then included in Medicare and still is to this day. So thank you, Uncle Bob, for driving hard and making those connections and those relationships so that our seniors who have earned that right can receive chiropractic care. So I want to say hi to a couple other people. My baby girl, I see you. And Dr. Debbie, thanks for joining us. And Kirsten and Patrina and John and Jonathan. Thanks so much for joining us. So, Bob, let's just jump in and let's talk about, Patrina did put in a question. So I guess let's just start there to make sure that we have plenty of time to at least answer questions that are being put down. So if you have just joined us, here's what we want you to do. Let us know where you're joining us from and what specific questions do you have about leasing a space, maybe even a lease that you already have. Maybe you're running into, like, you don't really understand CAM or triple net or things like that, and we'd like to help you out, but you got to. What advice would you give a new grad looking to lease an affordable space?
Great question, Patrina, and congratulations on your choice and recent graduation. So every market's different, and it's important, obviously, to have great space with good visibility and all those aspects. But of course, so affordable is the key, particularly as a new practitioner and being a startup. And it's very important to certainly have reserves, ideally, and the ability to launch over many weeks and months and grow that practice. So I think that there are many tools that you can utilize. There's a great website called loopnet.com, which is basically a wonderful aggregation site of really allow you to search by zip code and filter, strip centers or office space, etc. And you'll have a very nice current listing of currently available locations. There's a lot of detail in terms of the actual square footage, or what would be termed the footprint for the space you're going to occupy. Ideally, it would be great to find space that is already fully improved, perhaps a former medical, perhaps chiropractic space. It's very significant investment oftentimes in terms of what would be termed leasehold improvements. You may be able to garner some investment from your landlord. Moreover, you might also be fortunate to have some period of free rent as well, which should also be considered and asked for. And one important tactic in that regard, not to digress, but if you were looking at, say, a 3 or perhaps a 5-year lease at 60 months, you could also then say, well, look, I would be thrilled to have the space, but I'll propose a 5-year term, but I'd like the first 6 months free, and we'll just tack 6 months onto the term after the, so it'd be really through 66 months in that regard. So landlords still getting their full rent schedule, but above all, the flexibility to really minimize and have low to no rent in those important initial months.
Awesome. Hey, Bob, so I have a question for you about building in, and I know when we negotiated my lease, we didn't negotiate in leasehold improvements because we wanted to maintain control of that. We had, access, being from the community and knowing people and all that kind of stuff. What is your opinion about building that in? Because I've seen so many leases that, man, I cannot believe how much they're paying for leasehold improvements. Is there a tool or a guide to be able to determine, like, hey, you're kind of like getting taken advantage of versus no, have them do it because it's going to be better? Like, how do you weigh that out?
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful question, and there's a few things to recognize. And I'll say with a smile to our wonderful audience here, I'm not your lawyer, I'm not, your accountant and so on, but we're here to have a very frank discussion. So with that said, it's really certainly everything's ultimately negotiable. And, if it's the one space in town, well, market values are going to be higher, demand is higher, and hence it's less negotiable. If there's 3 or 4 spaces on either side of, this particular location, well, they're very interested in getting it leased up, right? So everybody has their own motivations. With respect to leasehold improvements, particularly, even if, you were going to have the landlord in some cases do those improvements, it's not all bad to have that, so long as you have, influence in terms of the actual floor planning and size of the rooms and maybe ideally choice of fixtures and so forth. It makes it fun. But yeah, you could also then ask for either free rent or potentially some type of an offset in terms of those actual improvements. Moreover, bear in mind that if the landlord is in fact expending those dollars on your behalf in order to acquire your tenancy, you probably then have less leverage to resist or evade what would be termed a personal guarantee of the lease agreement, which is something we need to spend a lot of time on and be really, really aware of, because those can be rather, significant and undermines in so many ways your ability for other borrowing and, just to get small business loans and so forth. So we want to mitigate when we can personal liabilities. Also important, obviously, then to have an entity for your practice. And those are my general initial thoughts regarding leasehold improvements. If you can find existing, all the better. If we're going to build out space, fine. And to really then answer your other final question, it's again, everything's negotiable, but one rule of thumb to kind of keep in mind is that a landlord, generally speaking, should be willing to invest the equivalent of 1 month's rent per year of the lease term. So 1,200 square foot space in a neighborhood strip center, say a $12 lease rate is going to equate to, roughly $14,400 per annum or $1,200 a month. And so maybe 1,200 times 3 or 5 years is, not a lot of money actually for leasehold improvements, but that would be, again, one rule of thumb, generally speaking.
And are you saying they should be willing to, so if you sign, let's say, a 5-year option, that over the course of those 5 years, they should be willing to put that back into the space or up front?
Up front, more than likely, and optimally, perhaps. You mentioned options. Those are another really important thing to be very cognizant of during the lease negotiations. You hate to make $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 investment in the space. You've got all your patients trained to come visit you, letterhead and your phone and all those expenses. It's difficult to move, right? So you don't want to be faced with being out of lease term and somebody else, with perhaps a higher amount of rent. The landlord could just switch you out. Options are very important to maintain. But you really want to have what would be termed an exclusive option rather than, which allows you, the doctor, the tenant, to make that choice of whether or not to renew the lease and or perhaps ultimately relocate. But exclusive options in the tenant's favor are very, very vital, important. And moreover, it allows you to, in essence, pre-negotiate the rent. So it doesn't just jump 20, 30, 40% just because, the lease goes over. So hopefully those rates can be negotiated at moderate 1 or 2% per annum increases, something along those lines. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I remember one of my clients, she had like a 5-year lease and we were coming up to it. And I wasn't coaching her when she started that. And the landlord wanted to move their kid who had graduated into that, right? And so they jacked up the rent so much that we were really faced with a tough decision because, like you said, she had developed a really successful practice and people were used to coming there. And, she had developed great relationships with the other tenants. And you don't know, right? And that's why it's so important to have, there are a few people who I think are really important on your success team. Absolutely, positively, you must have a coach, a mentor, or an awesome group like the 56-day boot camp where you have almost 200 mentors in the fact that we all help each other. You got to have a CPA that is not a tax planner, that is not a tax preparer, that is a CPA, and you better have a good attorney. And you better have a great individual like Bob to help you negotiate your lease, because that really does set the course. Like you may not know what CAM is. You may not know what all of these different terms, one thing I also remember that you helped me do was, many times things outside of that physical structure, the HVAC, the doors, the glass, all of those things are excluded. And I wouldn't have known. I mean, fortunately, my dad is really smart. And so he helped fill in those gaps or help me understand what you were teaching me as well. But many individuals don't have those kind of advisors. And so you would just like sign a lease and then the HVAC goes out and now you're responsible.
Yeah.
For whatever. So listen, it is in your best interest to get help. And at the end of this, I'm going to make sure that you all have an opportunity to get in touch with Bob as well. In the boot camp, he is teaching these things so that you're all aware. So there's another huge benefit of being in the boot camp. So Dr. Ashley asked this, her first question, and she's in Arkansas. Nice. She said, looking to start a practice, when should I start looking for a space to rent in the starting process?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say it's time to get started, Ashley.
Yesterday.
Yeah. Well, you can absolutely good. I mean, your time is valuable. Frankly, the landlords or the brokers, we haven't really talked about commercial real estate brokers yet, but they provide an important function. Many of those properties I mentioned on LoopNet have been listed and being represented by a commercial real estate, typically leasing agent, possibly the owner and landlord. And so you want to be respectful of their time, obviously. But with that said, there's one thing about real estate, and that is the market's always churning, churn. So if you're out looking now and maybe later this year, there will be different spaces. Some will be leased up and absorbed by the market, but there will be new supply, coming forward that could or should be considered. Moreover, you'll develop those relationships, and above all, you'll be able to experience and get a real feel for the market rate, let's call it, generally speaking, what the quality of the space is, what the traffic counts are, how nice is the parking lots, is the roof leaking, and is it at the, a moderate lease rate, or is it at the very top of the market? So it takes real time, honestly, to investigate all that. To those that have the ability and the interest, I build oftentimes an Excel spreadsheet with 3 to 5 properties and be able to do a pretty detailed analysis all at one glance, so that it's becomes more apparent ultimately about pros and cons and an important decision on location.
And you bring up a really good point on pros and cons. Like, you have to have your non-negotiables, non-negotiables and things that come up. There's a boot camper who has their space, established practice, and I can't remember what kind of restaurant moved in next door, and now the odor of the restaurant is awful. I mean, I remember you helped me figure those things out, because you never know who's going to come in. So making sure that those kind of clauses, so you don't know what you don't know. And that's why it's so important to have a professional on your team to be saying, like, well, what about this? And what about this? And it may never happen, but what if it does? Then what do you do? Or, like another client, a dentist moved in upstairs and had faulty equipment that constantly leaked. And so it leaked, destroyed her practice. She filed an insurance claim. We got it redone. The dentist didn't fix the problem, leaked again. And like all of these weeks, she's out of business. So it's so important to have all of those things built in, and you don't know what you don't know. I know I didn't know, and that's why I had to have help. So
things are unknowable, but to the extent that, we can foresee these matters, what you referred to the restaurant, for instance, that would fall under what would be termed co-tenancy, and the ability to, stipulate or at least understand what tenancies are going to be acceptable. And really, you could also, why not have an exclusive use? If I'm going to be the chiropractor in this 50,000 foot strip center, I don't want 3 more moving in, right? God bless them, but I don't need the competition. This is our space. So you want exclusive use provisions in your lease as well to hedge against those kinds of matters. You mentioned being out of business due to leaks. Well, it's not so much in the lease, but from a business perspective, your insurance agent should be speaking with you about business interruption insurance as well. It's not expensive typically, and it will replace your income during those periods of time when you're not operating, so to speak, almost regardless of the instances. Yeah.
And that's something too, you got to make sure when you file an insurance claim, there's going to be time before you get paid, right? And a lot of times it falls out. So never run your business so close to your overhead that if something unforeseen happens, you're stuck. And so I remember that a couple of things that you helped me build in too was like, if something happens at the fault of the landlord, like, I don't know, let's say the HVAC, something happens and now I can't see practice members and it's their fault. We built in like, all right, so what's going to happen? And my lost income that they would potentially be responsible for. And all of these different things. Again, I had no idea. I mean, I went to chiropractic college. I definitely am not a real estate agent or commercial real estate or all of the different qualifications that you have. And so it's really, really important. So another question Ashley asked is, what is a leasehold improvement clause?
Mm-hmm. Well, it'll be a relatively ambitious section in the lease that typically comes rather early. It will stipulate, typically will utilize amendments, or really what I should say is addendums that will be attached to the lease. Could be what's called the landlord's work letter. That will stipulate that prior to the inception of the tenancy, or certainly before the inception of rent commencement, those are 2 different days, that the landlord is going to perform a series of bullet-pointed improvements or repairs, maybe replace that HVAC unit, right? If it's 18 years old and wheezing, well, wait a second, we got a brand new 5-year lease term here just to have inferior HVAC equipment, etc. Could be the leasehold improvements, walls, carpets, fresh ceiling tiles, etc. Certainly the lights, bulbs ought to be switched out, all these kinds of matters. So the landlord's work letter will stipulate their responsibilities. Then there will be the tenant's work letter. And here's, okay, fine, we're going to receive the keys along with the execution of the lease. We're going to switch insurance policies. Maybe here's my first month's rent or not, but certainly security deposit more than likely. And then we can then commence our tenants improvements. And we'd really like not less than, say, 60 or 90 days to complete that work before the actual rent commencement, for instance. And hopefully you can get done in 45 days and have that period of free rent carved out and so forth. There's lots of nuances in that regard. But the real details of it are going to talk about in the lease agreement, at least, that when all the work is done, of course, the landlord is interested in maintaining, really, I should say, protecting the title to their asset. You don't want mechanics liens, from your tenant that goes unpaid. Then they're filing liens against the landlord's real estate, which makes their lender upset. It's just a mess, right? So all these things need to be understood. And there are lien waivers that will be required from the tenant or your contractors ultimately to be given to the landlord just to make sure all the bills are paid and there's the start of a great new tenancy and relationship. And in a perfect world, you execute a lease, you drop that baby in the file, and it stays there for years and years. Normally, you don't want to get the lease out because if you do, that means right? So,
no bueno on that one. But let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So if there is a lease and it wasn't, maybe there are clauses in it that somebody, let's say they're having problems. Like I know someone who's watching and she didn't pop in to ask a question, so I'm going to kind of ask for her. There was I think it was faulty plumbing, and it was just this back and forth nasty thing between her and her landlord, which then caused all kinds of problems. She couldn't see practice members and all of this kind of stuff. If somebody has a lease and is having problems, is that another reason they could reach out to you, is to look over what kinds of options do they have? Or is that strictly, no, you better just take that to an attorney?
Well, never say never. What the lease, if in instances like that, we should be examining the lease for what would be termed a remedy. And that would actually only come after what would be termed the Common Area Maintenance Clause, or CAM, which also stipulates the landlord is going to plow the snow, he's going to mow the grass, he's going to put salt on the sidewalks, he's going to maintain the pylon signage of the shopping center. The shopping center lights are going to be burning, or office building, obviously. Those provisions in the lease will be very specific in terms of stipulating the scope of work and who's responsible for the maintenance thereof, and yes, repair and maintenance when required, even replacement. It shouldn't be too tough to figure out, honestly. Alternatively, there may well be remedies that provide for a cap. So let's say that, and I don't know what those specifics are, but if the tenant has misused the head and the sewer is plugged, well, guess what? It's going to be the tenant's responsibility to make those repairs. And it's just, it's fair and reasonable, and at least should be. But the lease, typically, if it's well drafted, won't be silent on many issues.
Oh, nice. And so as we're kind of winding up or winding down, winding up, because I think it would be a great opportunity for all of you who are either looking to change space, or maybe you're wondering, you know what, there's this great opportunity for a commercial space that I could buy and have my practice there and have tenants and all that kind of stuff, and you're not really sure like where to go or who to talk to. I just put Bob's email address up there. Keep it, like, get in touch with him and ask him questions. Recognize, obviously, he is giving professional advice. So there will be a fee at some point in time, and the two of you will enter into that agreement together. If you are in the boot camp, there are special opportunities for you. So if you're not a boot camper, here's yet another reason to join the boot camp. And how you do that is 56daychirobootcamp.com/apply. You got to talk to me before you can get into the boot camp. I also ask this: if you're a student, or you have friends who are students or doctors who are just starting out, please share this Facebook Live with them. I think that Bob just provided all kinds of great tips and great things that we don't really learn about. I know when I was in school, we didn't talk about leases, and I only knew I needed to get a lease in order to have a practice. And so this is really, really valuable information and things that could save your friend, or save you from entering into a lease that you can't make. And please know there are always options. So start out with some great advice. Do you provide the option to review new leases? Ashley says. And I would say, Ashley, reach out to him. I mean, an email is at no cost. Reach out and get into a conversation via email, and then you can decide if you want to take it to the next level from there. I will tell you, it's like an attorney. They're worth their weight in gold. Because if you run into a problem, it's going to cost you way more than on the front end taking care of it. Just like chiropractic adjustments, right? Like, it's way less expensive to be healthy than it is to be sick, right? Or to regain your health. And it's the same thing here. Is all of us need to start on and put our best foot forward. So as we close, Bob, anything that you want to add to those who've joined us and are watching now, or who will catch this as a replay?
Yeah. Well, just briefly, a couple things to share. Big difference between leasing space and, yes, in fact, a decision to go ahead into an ownership or equity position. Lots of things to consider. It's a good time to do that, given the historically low interest rate environment that we continue to still be operating in. Probably should, adopt the important strategy of forming a separate entity to hold that real estate, but yet have your business, your practice, I should say, as an A tenant, so to speak, leasing back from your other company that is functioning as a landlord. And it's great over time. There's no question about it. It's not liquid, however. You can't just sell stocks in 20 minutes and raise, capital when you need it. So there's a lot of things to consider in that regard. As is more lease negotiations, we didn't really get into CAM and real estate taxes and the reconciliation of those shared experiences and the difference between gross leasable area and gross leasable occupied area, GLOA, which basically is a set of calculations that helps the landlord or not. And if the landlord's, using GLOA, that means he doesn't have to sit on his vacancy. You're paying for the vacancy as a proportionate share aspect to the CAM and the tax.
Oh.
There's all kinds of nuances that really need to be analyzed. Again, I'm not the lawyer, but I am a 30-year independent real estate broker here in Indiana and Michigan, but I work nationally. I've been very involved with the International Council of Shopping Centers, humbly one of 20 people worldwide to hold all 5 professional certifications, including a certified leasing specialist. Enclosed regional malls, but I've done a lot of open air and neighborhood strips, office buildings, industrial warehouse, farm ground, where Barb and I grew up. And so very, broad-based experience with a real focus in terms of leasing. I've typically been doing over 100 transactions per annum, and would be thrilled to provide guidance to any of the boot campers and your other clients as well, Barb.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. And obviously, whether it's like he said, if it's a closed mall or an open air, or maybe there's something else that you're considering for where you're going to have your practice, anything is possible. That is for sure. So thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate your feedback. To those of you who asked questions, Ashley and Patrina, thank you so much. And if you have further questions that you want answered, you can either reach Bob via email. You can also catch him on Facebook. I'll make sure his Facebook information is posted below. You can also ask me, and I'm happy to get you right in touch with them. The most important thing is don't be ignorant. That is never a policy that will serve you well. So become informed, take action, and know that you're never alone. I'm only ever a click away, and I'm happy to help you. What were you going to say, Bob?
LinkedIn as well. You can find me there and examine, my experience in some detail. R.L. Thatcher. Yep.
R.L. Thatcher on LinkedIn. You can also find him there. So God bless you all. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you on the flip side. I'm doing a Facebook Live tomorrow with Dr. Sarah. You're for sure going to want to catch that one. She's an incredibly dynamic chiropractor and boot camper and has some great tips and strategies that we will be sharing with you on how she has quickly exploded her practice as a result of being in the boot camp. So thanks so much. Take care. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Barb. Be blessed. Bye-bye.